Welcome to Visionaries Global Media, your number one source for podcasting entertainment. Visionaries Global Media, envisioning excellence on a global scale.
This is Nattering E with your host, Eric Friedlander.
Nattering, Nattering, Nattering with E. Nattering, Nattering, Nattering with E. Nattering, Nattering, Nattering with E. Welcome to Nattering E Trades with Eric Friedlander. Episode 2 of Nattering E Trades. After defining trades and how they work in a multitude of sports leagues this week, we'll be looking at why some players benefit from trades. You know, similar to changing jobs in the real life, in sports, when you're traded mid-season, it's basically your company trading you to another company in the same industry, but they're hoping to benefit by having you leave. Wouldn't that be nice in a real job if your job got tired of you and instead of, firing you around Christmas time or anything like that, they were like, no, we'll send you to this other company that also does the same things that we do, and they're looking for people, and we need some compensation. So they said they'd compensate us, and we'll send you over there. And so instead of losing your job or anything like that, you end up going to another place and you find that you're happy there and you decide, I want to stick here for a while. But then they decide in a couple of years, oh, maybe we'll trade him. Or maybe you get signed to a contract too, the same way that sports athletes do, where they're like, here's a 3-year deal. We'll trade you to company Z from company X, and then you'll be able to decide uh, where no, and then the company will be able to decide where you'll benefit or not benefit. And I mean, at the end of the day, similar to sports, you could get released, but I mean, they have to pay you out. It's a whole thing. So as we tie this back into sports, as I mentioned before, it's basically your company trading you to another company in the same industry, but they're hoping to benefit by having you leave. So, as harsh as this sounds, sometimes it works out for the best for both team and player, or players alike. That's right. Sometimes multiple players from one team will join another team, either for other players or for draft picks or for cash compensation. In some scenarios, players actually can say to their managers, I want to play for Team X and I want my friend to join me. So we both play for this really good team. And sometimes you'll see a manager be like, okay, sure, no problem. You see this a lot in like hockey, for instance, where a star player will go, but then a guy who's on like the fourth line who behind the scenes happens to be that star player's best friend will also go to the new team. So one example of that I think of is in the 1980s when Gretzky got traded from Edmonton to the LA Kings. Dave Semenko went with him, and I think also Marty McSorley. And while both those guys are enforcers and they don't really put up a lot of points, they were buddies with Gretzky, and Gretzky was like, you can trade me or whatever, but I want those guys to come with me because A, they'll protect me, but B, on a more personal level, they're two of my best friends, and I want them to benefit from this move too. On the other side of things, so you'll get a manager sometimes that'll be like, look, I want to trade you. Where do you want to go? Player will say, okay, I'll go to X, Y, I'll go to teams ABC, and that's part of my no trade clause. However, I'll see if my friend also wants to come too, and then if he wants to join me, we'll up and we'll move to one of these teams that you can make it work. On the other side of things, as you heard on my previous podcast, Nattering Chell, also on Visionaries Global Media, the one that I do with Tori, we're talking about how the Rangers basically were like, you know what? You're not the boss of me with your no trade clauses. We're going to put you on waivers if you don't go to the teams that we want to go to. And that's basically the manager being like, you're not my mom. You can't tell me what to do. And then they'll trade the players to different teams instead of in a package for another player or compensation from a team that they wanted to go to. Now, in that scenario too, sometimes the players want to go to a really good team, but that really good team does not have the compensation that the team they're currently on wants them to no wants to receive. So, for example, you'll see a team that's like I'm trying to think, but sometimes you'll see like a team that's not even close to the playoffs will be willing to grab a player and take his entire contract, and that'll benefit the current team that the guy's on that wants to move on from him because they don't have to pay anything of that contract because the lower team probably has more cap room or more cash available and they can they can compensate the player. The player himself might be like, "Well, wait, I want to go to a contender. I don't want to go to a team that I mean can only afford me but isn't really going anywhere." So, keeping up with that New York Rangers example, the Rangers traded Jacob Trouba to the Anaheim Ducks. Respectfully to Ducks fans, if you're listening to this, the Ducks are going nowhere. They're not going to be competitive for the next couple of years, but they they met one of Trouba's conditions, as Tori explained on Nattering Chell, which is he wanted to either play in New York or he wanted to play in California. The reason being that his wife is his wife is a doctor, and so he wanted to be somewhere with really good hospitals. So New York has really good hospitals, and California, particularly Anaheim, has really good hospitals. So he wants to go. So they traded him to Anaheim to both benefit from not having to pay his compensation anymore, and also because it would make his wife happy, to go from New York to California, and she can still practice medicine, uh, and most likely get a job at a really good hospital. However, realistically, if I'm Truba and I'm looking at it just strictly from hockey, I don't want to go to Anaheim. As I said, Anaheim's going nowhere. They're not going to make the playoffs this year. That Pacific Division is impossible to get out of. And if anything, I'd want to go to like Colorado or even St. Louis or even go back to Winnipeg where they were before because the Winnipeg Jets are first place in the whole NHL. But um, I don't think that the Jets had a package available that would allow for them to fit Trouba's $8 million a year contract for the next 2 years under their cap. And even Colorado, I don't know if they have that much cap room that they could keep Trouba and then go on and sign Rantanen, who's going to be a free agent in the offseason. And so Trouba right now, at least, is going to be in Anaheim because Anaheim was one of the only teams that could afford him, even though they're not that competitive. However, on the other hand, though, this might actually benefit Trouba because of the fact that Anaheim has a lot of cap room, they may be able to flip him for higher draft picks come the trade deadline and eat some of his salary. So we use the example on Nattering Chell of Trouba being able to come to Toronto, for instance, but like Anaheim retaining some of his salary. So, in other words, instead of Anaheim making Toronto now pay the remaining 8 million, instead they would pay uh 5 million and they would retain 3 million of the salary. And so that benefits both Trouba because he gets to play for a contender, but it also benefits the Leafs because they don't have to go over their budget with Trouba. Most of the time, though, when it comes to why a player benefits from a trade, it's normally because of opportunity. Similar to my example before about how a job, wouldn't it be nice if a job was willing to trade you to another job in the same industry as opposed to firing you. In in sports, all you're asking for as a player ultimately is for an opportunity. Now, in some scenarios, you'll see a player there's different factors that go into it, but essentially it's the opportunity which is what appeals to the players. Some players are very high caliber, and for that reason, no matter what team they play on, uh, they'll always be a good player. Like you'll see some guys in various sports that they'll always put up like 100 points in the NHL, or they'll hit 35 to 40 home runs and 100 RBIs in the MLB, regardless of who they play for. In the NFL, you might see like a wide receiver, regardless of what team he's on, he's still gonna get his like 10 or 15 touchdowns and over 900 to 1,000 yards passing. And so that brings me to when the Kansas City Chiefs made a deal with, I believe it was the Arizona Cardinals for DeAndre Hopkins. The DeAndre Hopkins throughout his career has been one of the star wide receivers in the league. For a while he played for the Houston Texans, and then I think as well for the uh, Arizona Cardinals. And he's a really good player, but like he was a good player on a bad Cardinals team. And so for that reason, it gave the Chiefs a little bit of the option to play hardball, because they were like, yeah, we'll take Hopkins from you, but we're only going to give you a third round pick for him. And the the sorry, so I misspoke there. He actually played for the Titans this year, not the Cardinals, but he has played for the Cardinals. In his career, Hopkins, he started out in Arizona, or sorry, he started out in Texas on the Houston Texans, and that's where he established himself as a really good wide receiver and then eventual star. Randomly, he got traded in the before the 2021 season to Arizona by then Texans manager and head coach Bill O'Brien. I think it was a player conflict, because I remember he got traded to Arizona, and then O'Brien made a couple other deals where the Texans basically tanked to eventually get CJ Stroud, but at that time, nobody knew what the heck they were actually doing. And so he got traded. I mean, he got fired for that reason. Then Hopkins spent about 3 years with the Cardinals. His first season, he was unbelievable. He had 115 receptions, um, and over 1,400 yards and 6 touchdowns, which was actually one of his lower seasons. His next 2 years were pretty much injury filled, so he didn't really work out in Arizona. But then he went to the Titans for a couple of years. In his first season with the Titans, even though that was a terrible Titans team, he played pretty well. He had 75 receptions for 1,057 yards and 7 touchdowns, which goes to show you that regardless of who your quarterback is, if you're a good wide receiver, you can make it work and you can still put up a lot of good points, because Ryan Tannehill and Will Levis are not good quarterbacks, as Chad will tell you on View from the Top of the Goalpost, also on Visionaries Global Media. And Hopkins was able to still put up a really good season. Then this year, in 6 games, 3 games started actually with the Tennessee Titans. He had 15 receptions for 173 yards and 1 touchdown. He then gets traded to the Chiefs, and games he starts 5 of the 7 games he's been in. He's been targeted uh 45 times with 30 receptions, 357 yards, and 4 touchdowns, which is much, much improved. So DeAndre Hopkins shows that, you know what, even though he's entering his 30s or is just over 30, he's 32 years old, he's still a very, very good wide receiver. And most of the time, when it comes to why a player benefits, it's because of the opportunity that they're given. As you can see, he wasn't given that much of an opportunity in Tennessee, at least this year. And then after a couple of injuries with the defending Super Bowl champion Chiefs, he became one of their main targets. Now that the Chiefs have got a couple of their guys back, they've been able to move Hopkins further down the depth chart. But I mean, even as a second or third receiver on the team, he's able to put up some decent numbers. So on the other, so that's when players benefit. Sometimes players won't necessarily benefit from moving to a different team. Sometimes they're a beneficiary of the system that they're in. And what I mean by that is that a player could look lights out on a really bad team because that system that that coach has or the multiple coaches have um hyper no, flatters. I guess flatters isn't the right word, but it makes the player look better than he possibly is. And so sometimes you'll see that that player will be really good on his bad team, but then when he goes to a team where there's guys either of his caliber or a little bit better, he slides down the depth chart. So sometimes you'll see this when a team tanks and they have one or two good players. So in the NBA right now, I'm thinking about like RJ Barrett for the Raptors and maybe Kelly Olynyk, who just came back for the Raptors. They're very and Postal, Poto, I think his name is. They're very good players for bad teams, but when they're on excellent teams, they're just bench bench players or guys who benefit from like the final couple minutes of a game because they're depth role guys. So when it comes to making a trade, what you're looking for as a manager, but also in particular for players, is that it benefits you and it benefits the team. For instance, a few years, probably about 11 or 12 years ago, Jerome McGinley gets traded from the Calgary Flames to the Boston Bruins. And he's one of the rare cases where the captain of a team gets dealt to a contending team and he knows that by going to the contending team, he's helping the team that he's been the captain of for a very long time. So I believe at the time the Flames got a few good draft picks and they were in the midst of a little bit of a rebuild while Iginla benefited by going to Boston and having a chance to compete in the playoffs and go for a Stanley Cup. Now, while the Bruins, I don't believe, won the Stanley Cup with him on the team, Calgary benefited a little bit better because they were able to get those draft picks because Iginla knew his value and he was able to um, turn his play into good picks for the Flames. Um, Another thing is, in some scenarios when players get traded, they can benefit. Oh no, I just said that. In the latter example of okay, so in some scenarios, as I just noted, in some scenarios, when players get traded, they can benefit from the trade because the new team has better players to accommodate the traded player's skill set. On the other hand, some players are just naturally incredible talents individually, and so any team they play for, good or bad, will benefit from their abilities. So, one player I think of with that sort of example in the MLB is Starling Marte. He currently plays for the New York Mets, but for a couple of years there, he was playing on some really not good teams. I don't want to call any team bad partially because uh, it's a new season and they could potentially benefit from a new season. Like there's so many different factors that go into trades, let alone the entire season, that a team that's garbage this past year could actually turn into a really good team in the future. So Starling Marte in 2021, he started the year with the Florida Marlins, and he put up pretty good numbers in 64 games with the Florida Marlins, who were not a good team and haven't been good for a number of years. He was one of their better players. He had in 64 games, he had 7 home runs, 25 RBIs, 11 doubles, 71 hits, and his average was 305. He was then traded to the Oakland Athletics, where he seemed to have pretty good numbers too in 56 games. So he continued with the hits. The hits were about the same, 70. He had 74 there, whereas in Miami he had 71. Um, he had 5 home runs and 30 RBIs compared to 7 home runs and 25 RBIs with the Marlins for a total of 12 home runs and 55 RBIs. He was able to raise his average from 305 to 316. And despite Oakland not doing too well either, he was one of their better players. He then decided, you know what? I'm going to turn this into a better season I mean, a payday for myself, and I'm going to go to New York, but not the Yankees. He went to the Mets. So in his first season with the Mets, he benefited because the Mets had an opportunity to compensate him well financially, but also they were closer to the World Series than Oakland was. So it made sense for him to go over there because they happen to need an outfielder. And he's a terrific outfielder. Oh no, he's 36 years old. So he's a little bit past his prime, but he's a very, very good player. This past season, he in 92 games, he had a 266 average, 7 home runs and 40 RBIs. So it seems to me that like he doesn't really hit that many home runs. I mean, in his first season with the Mets back in 2022, he had 16 home runs and 63 RBIs. But he's typically for most of his career, he doesn't hit that many home runs, but he does get a lot of hits and a lot of RBIs, which means he's good to get on base. So he's good for the power hitters to benefit from. Um, he's a guy that I think of where I'm like, he's an excellent player in the same way that Denard Hopkins is, because DeAndre Hopkins is because DeAndre was on a not so good Texans team, not so good Arizona team, and not so good Tennessee team, but he benefited from being the best player on those teams, which then allowed him to move to the Kansas City Chiefs, which are a dynasty Super Bowl team. With Starling Marte, he historically the teams that he played for prior to the Mets were he started his career with the Pittsburgh Pirates and spent 7 years there. Then he had one season with the Arizona Cardinals. Half a season with Arizona. Then he went to Miami for 2 years. Then he went to Oakland for half a season. And now he's on the Mets. And he should benefit in this lineup too with the Mets, as they just got Juan Soto, who signed there for 15 years and $765 million. He should benefit by like he'll be on base while Soto and Francisco Lindor and hopefully Pete Alonso comes back, and they'll all their heavy hitters will be able to cash in guys like Marte and Naimo and a couple other very good on base guys. So Marte did the right thing by basically going and parlaying being the best player on a middle of the pack team and getting traded to other middle of the pack or not very good teams and turning that into a contract with a team that is expected to contend for the next uh, number of years while his contract still goes. So conversely, sometimes sometimes trades don't work out for either team, but that's a story for a future episode. So, with that in mind, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Check out our other shows in the Nattering universe. We have Nattering Bola that comes out every Wednesday, looking back at various Pro Wrestling Guerrilla Battle of Los Angeles tournaments. Currently, we just finished up 2014. We're now going back to look at Kyle O'Reilly's journey from 2013 to partway through 2014 to look to see when he could accomplish winning the PWG World Title. Um, we'll also be looking at in January. We're going to start looking at 2015 PWG and then 2016, and where the winners of those tournaments eventually either wrestled for the world title or won the world title. You can also check out Nattering Chell, which comes out Thursdays on Nattering with E Network and on the Visionaries Global Media Network, where Tori and I go around the NHL. We look at various storylines, how the prospects are doing for various teams, and with the World Juniors and the prospects tournaments, or sorry, and the prospects being able to play in the World Junior tournament, we're going to start every quarter doing a prospect look over the next couple of years. So we're starting off with our beloved Toronto Maple Leafs because we always end the podcast talking about the Leafs. And yeah, so that'll be next week. Then we'll continue on from there. So those two shows are always around on Wednesdays and Thursdays. This, as always, comes out on Saturdays. So thank you for spending the first part of your weekend with me, looking at looking at trades across the big four major sports leagues and player movement in general across British European soccer, also known as football. In terms of the Nattering Express wrestling show, right now it's on hiatus, but the plan is to get back to it in sometime in January. I have some ideas that I want to do with that show where we're going to be doing looking a little bit more at Lex Luger, but also looking more at the indies. As you know, we've had Peapod on a couple of times, so I'm very loosely thinking of going through all of Ruthless Pro's library on IWTV and talking about that, talking about that with Peapod. Also, there's a couple other promotions that we're checking out: Wrestling Revolver, GCW, things of that nature. And so I'm gonna have a couple of those things going on. The other thing that I wanted to say here today was that I have a blog called Eric's Nattering Adventures, but it's under the banner of doodlebrews24.com. Now, the reason for that is I'm big into craft beer as well and music, and so I'm gonna get back to writing about that. And I have a segment there called the Hot Tag, where I'm gonna be looking at various tag teams. And you can catch me on other places too. Uh, I'll be on this week's Good Cop, Bad Cop with Graham, Matt, and Ryan. And SJ and I may reunite on that podcast as a brief Frigid A takes on Good Cop, Bad Cop. We haven't heard from SJ in a while, but are hoping that she's well. Looking forward to speaking with her as always. And yeah, so as always, you can check me out, Nattering with E, where you get your podcasts, mainly Podbean and Spotify. For some reason, Apple won't put me up there. Don't know why. Which is also partially why we went into joining up with Visionaries Global Media, because they're on everything. And so, um, sort of selfishly, sorry, Chad and Diesel and Tom, but selfishly, we wanted to get on Apple. So that was one of our main reasons for going on the Visionaries Global Media Network. Myself and my co-hosts really appreciate that you've had us on, and yeah, so you can get those guys wherever. And if you don't listen to this until January, I want to wish you a very happy holidays. Hope it's amazing for you. And if you ever need a co-host or someone to edit your footage, you can get a hold of me. Reach out to me at nattering with E, all one word, at gmail.com. And I'd be happy to talk to you about either coming on the pod or doing some work with you or just to chat in general. All right. Thanks again for nattering with me. And until next time, this is E from Nattering with E.